Hi everybody, it's Couple Indemnity. We are a film podcast about the love of cinema by two very dedicated film fans. I'm Hal, and as ever this week, I'm joined by Izzy.
Hi everyone.
Following my selection that was Sinners last week, you've chosen a very different film, a British period classic from the wonderful Merchant Ivory Productions. One I believe you hadn't seen, that was Remains of the Day. What was your thinking behind choosing this one?
It was a film that I knew was highly regarded, but also an adaptation of a Kazuo Ishiguro novel, and I am a big fan of Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, so I was interested to see whether this was similar or kind of in keeping with that film.
Yeah, wonderful cast. That's the first standout thing we noticed. Were you aware of the story and the general plot?
I knew it was roughly kind of set around the 1930s, 40s period, but I didn't know. And about a butler. That was about as much as I knew.
First impressions?
Wow. It's a very unique film. I can't think of another film really quite like it.
Yeah, it's a real certain mood, this is. It's a wonderful examination of class and...
But it's such a unique...
repression and kind of British temperament in a very, very turbulent and fluctuating time period of British politics. And I love the way that the time span is sandwiched between pre and post World War II.
Yeah, it's such a unique perspective and portrait of institutionalism and kind of inbuilt repression and subservience in terms of like classism and the class system in that time period. It's a really fascinating kind of character study you can do into Anthony Hopkins' character, for sure.
Wonderful. Yeah, it was a great choice, and I'm really looking forward to digging deep into the actual story here, because it's a fascinating time span of this particular character. Why don't we break for the trailer and we'll get into it.
A man cannot call himself well contented until he has done all he can to be of service to his employer.
For 30 years at Darlington Hall, Stevens the butler has lived a life of perfect order in a perfect world. Now, his world is about to change.
Well, no gentleman callers allowed, of course. What I do find a major irritation are those persons who are simply going from post to post looking for romance. No offense intended, of course.
Oh, none taken.
Columbia Pictures presents a new film from the creators of Howard's End.
What happens within this house during the conference could have repercussions on the whole course that Europe is taking.
I understand fully.
In a life devoted to service.
A first-rate housekeeper is essential in a house like this where great affairs are decided.
You don't like to have pretty girls on the staff, I've noticed. Might it be that our Mr. Stevens fears distraction?
You know what I'm doing, Miss Kenton? I'm placing my thoughts elsewhere while you chatter away.
The Remains of the Day, released in November 1993, starring some real acting royalty here in Anthony Hopkins, Emma Thompson, James Fox, Christopher Reeve, Peter Vaughan, and a very young Hugh Grant. Adapted from the 1989 novel The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro and directed by James Ivory. Your selection is, can you read us the synopsis?
Stevens is a butler who serves his master at great personal cost. However, when he learns of his employer's Nazi leanings, he has to make the choice to stay or leave.
Yes, no, I wasn't aware at all, really, of that element of the plot.
No, that's why it's such a strange synopsis.
I knew it was about a butler in service in this time period, but I didn't know it had that really edgy political element and background to it.
But don't you even think that synopsis is a bit misleading as to what the film is about? Because ultimately it's the indoctrination of this character, this complete kind of brainwashing of this character into a lower class mentality.
Yeah,
is that he never even feels there's a choice to make.
That's misleading in terms of his persona and his decision making and his loyalty, because this is a study in subservience, really, and about an element of British classism, of kind of accepting that whatever your peers or your superiors are, the direction they're moving is the honourable one. And
Yeah,
that's
just this-
even quoted a few times in this, that he believes that his employer is doing the right thing for his own country.
He assumes that because his employer is of nobility and is his master, that he will always do the honourable, noble thing because he is his master. He doesn't question, he doesn't consider for a moment that his master is wrong, because even his father himself has been so kind of indoctrinated by the class system. So I find that synopsis is actually quite misleading into what the plot is actually, because it's not this kind of martyr, kind of dramatic takedown of fascism. It isn't like that, this film.
No, I mean, and the other thing is that there's the time span element, because we're set in the early scenes, narrated by Emma Thompson, the former housekeeper, Miss Kenton, and we're set in the early scenes in 50s post-war Britain. Stevens, who played by Anthony Hopkins, is the butler and remains in this current time period to be the butler of Darlington Hall. He's received a letter from the housekeeper.
It's that the Lord of Darlington has died, and it has been purchased by an American ex-congressman that we do see in flashback to when he was younger as well throughout the film. But he's purchased the house,
Yep.
and Stevens is still there, but he's on his own now because over time all of the staff have been let go or have left, and he's the only one still there, and he's now the remaining butler, remaining staff in this house, waiting for the family to come and join this American congressman in the countryside. And he is looking to kind of hire new staff for this new era for the house, as it has previously been kind of shamed as to the association the old lord had with the Nazi Party during the war. And it's been this like big nationwide scandal that this lord was involved with bringing war to Britain.
Yeah. And then we move back 20 sort of 25 years previously to the early 30s, when a young Emma Thompson as Miss Kenton arrives at the hall for the first time, and she is taken on as an employer by Stevens, and we really kind of get that early dynamic between the two. At its most distant and repressed in the early scenes, when Stevens is kind of explaining her duties, and almost kind of pre-warning her that any kind of romantic associations within the household is truly frowned upon, so her behaviour will be under close watch.
Well, he's telling her off, isn't he, for calling his father, who he's also hired at the same time as the like under butler.
Yeah.
He's telling her off for calling his father by his first name, not his last name. So immediately we're kind of getting this kind of characterization of Stevens as as someone who's like a stickler for the rules.
Yeah, and also Stevens' whole life and persona is around his job. You know, he is devoted to this profession, and it's his whole life. And there's a scene much later in the film where Miss Kenton is asking him what he looks forward to in life, and he even goes on to say, you know, returning to the hall and ironing out all of the problems with the staff. Like, this is his passion, and this is his reason for getting up in the morning, you know.
But I think Miss Kenton also, is like the personification of that side of Stevens that not even that he wishes, but like is verbalizing the stuff he's not able to verbalize, because she later says as well that she's a coward and she's scared of leaving the house and what would kind of wait for her outside of a life in service. So I think she almost verbalizes what he is. He's even too indoctrinated to be able to verbalize. I don't think he actually is consciously aware of it, but she is. And it's that for that reason that they butt heads in the early scenes over these kind of questions on what is respectable and what isn't kind of right and proper, and the way to go about things in the house and the way you should be in service.
Yeah, and Stevens' personal life is already kind of brought into play here, because he's obviously brought his father into employment in the same household. And his father is obviously much older than, played by the great Peter Vaughan.
Love Peter Vaughan.
And it's very clear early on that it's really taxing for him to perform his very physical daily duties, working long hours. It's a very physical job,
Don't you think
waiting on all of these members of the household throughout the day, and carrying such big trays across, and physically it's taking its toll on him. And that is the first clash between Stevens and Miss Kenton, because Miss Kenton kind of is the first to confront him, to say that his father really can't perform these duties any longer, because he's going to have more and more of these accidents that we see him have.
Don't you think that his father kind of serves as a glimpse for us into the future as well, of what Stephen's life is going to be like in service? And that
absolutely, yeah.
The reason he is the way he is because his father is the way he is. And this is a kind of an inherited, it's like an ancestral subservience that is like passed down through the generations, of like, it's loyalty to your master, loyalty to your upper class kind of superiors before your own family. So like, his father is not warm or paternal or loving at all. And he reveals that he had issues with his wife as well, and that he tried his best as a father, but he knows he kind of wasn't a very good one. And I think Stevens as well very much kind of represents that, and it's like a glimpse. Looking at his father in those scenes, it's like we don't need to see a flash forward, but we see him as a representation of what Stevens' life will be like as well.
Yeah, it's a pre-warning to not only us as the viewer, but to Stevens, in that giving your life to this service and to one family takes its physical toll, and you get very little reward for it, other than staying in steady employment, which in one kind of reverse class way is almost like the most they could hope for. Like that was a form of success for them, was to stay in employment from the same family, because you're seen as loyal servants.
But it's the butler is a different class almost in its own, isn't it? Because it's like
the head butler.
In terms of the food chain in the house, you are then in charge of all of the other maids and all of the other servants in the house, and valets or whatever else there is. Like, you are top dog. So in terms of the hierarchy, that is the best as a working class man that you could probably hope to be. So there is a sense of kind of ambition and pride in that position, and knowing that's pretty much as good as it will get.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk a little bit about what's going on above stairs. So what we see in the early scenes is the Earl of Darlington, played by James Fox. We see that a lot of his kind of daily work is consumed very much by political activities, and or diplomatic activities rather, and he is in a very difficult and turbulent time period in Europe. He is kind of very much integral to a lot of political discussions.
He's a strange character, isn't he? Because the early characterization of him is that he's very generous and he's very kind and compassionate. Like, he takes Stephen's word for it that his father will be a good worker and just kind of hires him on the spot. He trusts Stevens. I think it's an interesting characterization that they don't have him that he's married or with a family or anything like that. He's basically like an older bachelor.
Yeah, we don't see him under any woman's influence. Absolutely. He's his own man. But what I think the film really gets the balance right so well, and so in such a subtle, terrific way, is that these characters aren't what they seem. They're not black and white. They're very nuanced. And the Earl of Darlington, played by James Fox, is very sympathetic to his servants and to the people around him. He comes across as a fairly nice and amiable man to have as a boss, almost, because he's approachable. But there is this underlying thing, and this is what's not obvious in the first few scenes with him in his relationship with Stevens, is that he has a deep admiration deep down to Germany and to a kind of charitable need almost for Britain to give something back to Germany. Because of the dreadful political climate and economic climate of the country.
Because of the tariffs after World War One.
Yeah.
And what they call reparations after World War One, that he and also he had a friend who was German, and he is speaks German, and he clearly is sympathetic to Germany's economic and political state post World War One. Is clearly an educated man, but he's also, as you say, quite diplomatic, and very early on we're told he'll host these big hunting parties even though he hates hunting. So it kind of is coming across that he's a bit of a people pleaser.
Yes.
That he avoids conflict, and he doesn't want to kind of rock the boat too much, so he kind of just goes along with what the majority want.
Yeah, because a lot of these people gathering at these kind of dinner parties and hunting parties are not all on the same political persuasion. There's a lot of European people there and American, with Christopher Reeve's character, who have very different political leanings, but they are all very important in the political spectrum of the day. So the Earl of Darlington is gathering and hosting these events of very important figures.
And one of the big events that he's hosting is this conference with important figures and lords and whoever from France, Germany, and America, and Italy, and other European countries as well, which is where we see the return of Christopher Reeve's character, who we've only seen so far in kind of flash forward into the late 50s, as a younger man coming over from America, very kind of, how would you describe him? Anti-war, but also still kind of sticking to the post-World War One decisions of...
I think he's trying to communicate a need for modernity, for honouring your own country.
Yeah, and he's very anti all of the kind of pompousness and...
I'm trying to avoid words like...
aristocratic
I'm trying to avoid words like colonialism and things like that, because I think that's not the first thing that's obvious.
But he's very progressive, very anti all of the established, because with the German woman that comes over for this conference, they're all baronesses or earls, or they're aristocracy. And he's very anti that.
They're people of title, and what Christopher Reeve's character, the American, has come in is saying that they need to wipe the slate clean in this political climate, and they need professionals. They need professionals who are diplomatic and can see what is needed for Europe at that time.
Lord Darlington is a classic English gentleman of the old school. Decent and honorable and well-meaning. So are all of you here, all decent and honorable and well-meaning gentlemen. It's been a pleasure and a privilege for me to visit with you here. But, now excuse me, I have to say this. You are, all of you, amateurs. And international affairs should never be run by gentlemen amateurs. Do you have any idea of what sort of a place the world is becoming all around you? The days when you could just act out of your noble instincts are over. Europe has become the arena of realpolitik, the politics of reality. If you like, real politics. And what you need is not gentlemen politicians, but real ones. You need professionals to run your affairs, or you're headed for disaster. So I propose a toast, gentlemen, to the professionals.
And yet the deep irony is that, flash forward to 1958, where we've seen, is he's now living as a lord in this massive house with a butler and everything else. So there's a hypocrisy almost in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I almost felt a little bit frustrated with Christopher Reeve's character, because I would like to know a bit more about him. And I felt like that character...
It's a bit of an underdeveloped character.
Whether it was a bit of a red herring or that he was just a bit underused, and maybe that character is a bit more developed in the novel. I don't know, because by the flash forward to the ending, the character in the 50s is brought back into the story.
Yeah.
And obviously we're under the impression that Stevens will now serve to him as an American for the rest of his life. And also Stevens is very proud to say it's almost like his escape, his kind of justification for staying on at the house, and he's trying to sweep under the carpet his association with the Earl of Darlington, given his political leanings.
Because that's not his master
World
anymore.
Yeah.
It's definitely like, my master is not him, and
But there's
he'll
that-
like almost pretend he didn't know him at all.
But there's that scene, isn't there, at the grocery shop where he's talking to the owner of the shop, and he says he's almost tempted to deny that he actually worked for the Earl of
Even though it's
Darlington.
kind of insinuated that he was like there by his deathbed, like he nursed him, essentially, like when the Earl was dying. And even though that has happened, even though he was like probably the last person loyal to him after everything that happened, he's denying knowing him at all now.
Yeah, I mean, we've also got to talk about, coming up to the middle of the film, the downfall of the father character and how that affects Stevens, because Miss Kenton informs him that he is spiralling.
Yeah,
You
he's
know.
leaving things around where they shouldn't be, like the dustpan and on the stairs, and he's moving things to where they shouldn't be, and there are things in the wrong place, and things that would, annoy Stevens Jr. Immensely, but he's trying to kind of cover.
Yeah.
And that's I guess like one of the only points in the whole film that we see a slightly more humanistic element to his character.
For a second. Yeah, for a second.
There is a glimpse that he's trying to cover for his father, I guess, to keep him in work, but also because his father is also deeply entrenched in the whole institutionalism of it all, and wants to work and doesn't want to leave. So he knows that's what will make his father happy, is staying and working.
Yeah, I mean, I found these moments in the film remarkable, because it's on the night that there's a big political function in the evening, post-dinner, and as Stephen says, it's been a long day, and he has a brief moment of conversation with, later on in the evening, with the Earl of Darlington, and he says it's been a long evening. It's even taken a physical toll on him, and Stevens is one who will very reluctantly let any sign of weariness or fatigue show in his body language or his face.
Even him saying it's been a long day is like essentially him saying it's been the worst day ever, because the Earl doesn't know that upstairs his dad is like 5 minutes away from death.
Well, I think by that point he has passed away.
He has died upstairs,
Yeah.
and yet Stevens hasn't allowed himself to remove himself from the party to go and
Stevens doesn't
say
even
his goodbyes.
But if we remember, Stevens doesn't even go up and see him. He remains steadfast and says that he needs to carry out the rest of his duties that evening.
Yeah.
It's not until later that night, halfway through the party, that he then goes up and visits him. And by that point, he's passed away. Everyone's gathered outside the room.
And
Miss
even
Kenton and the
when
doctor.
he goes into the room, he like touches his father's forehead like once, and then like he's checking his temperature or something, and then pulls away and says something about sending the doctor to go and see the French ambassador.
Yeah,
guy.
whose feet are playing him up. Yeah.
Because that to him is more important than discussing his father's death.
The living are more important than the dead, basically.
No, the living aristocratic who he serves are more
Yes.
important than his own family.
Yeah.
And grieving his dad that has just died. That making sure some random French aristocrat is comfortable and like, even though it's just his feet. And the doctor is like, if it's an emergency, if it's urgent, and yes, it is urgent, because it's his kind of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, and in the second half of the film, one of the next flashpoints is, I think we get the impression it's a little bit further down the line, maybe a year or two later in the early 30s, when fascism is really on the rise in Europe. There's the arrival of two refugee maids, who we kind of understand and assume to be German Jewish.
Well, I didn't really get that until...
Well, they were definitely German.
Definitely
But-
German, because he's speaking to them in German, but...
But because of how scared they looked, I automatically assumed they were Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't quite get that until there was the kind of loaded looks when he's been reading and talking about, when he's been in another meeting that's supposed, I mean, it's very kind of reminiscent of like Mosley and stuff like that.
But there's another thing, because Earl of Darlington is obsessed by speaking German, and he's obsessed by by letting that culture wash over him, and he keeps trying to talk to the two maids in German, and they refuse to do it. They don't really want to acknowledge they're from Germany, because they're desperate to speak in English, and they don't want to reflect over being German or contemplate or celebrate their own culture.
Yeah.
Because they're doing anything to get away from it.
Mm.
That was what was obvious to me in that 5-minute scene with them. And Earl of Darlington is completely the opposite. He's fascinated by Germany by that point.
Yeah. Before we move too far along in the plot, though, I think we should talk about Hugh Grant's character, because he has made appearances before this point in the film as well. And it's probably like the funniest moment in the film.
Yeah, I mean, up until this point, I think he's been a bit of light relief, hasn't he? Because he's been in that. We've been introduced to him briefly as
the Earl's
godson, and there's a very amusing scene where the Earl of Darlington has approached Stevens, or probably when Stevens is in the room cleaning for him or cleaning up, and he said that can he do him a favour and give his godson a talk on the birds and the bees.
But I think it's brilliantly ironic in that I think clearly Stevens has no experience with women or romantic sexual relationships anyway. So he is also completely naive and kind of inexperienced in talking about those kinds of things.
Which made it all the more wonderful. When you get
but he's so eager to please his master that he kind of just says yes to it anyway, but he's obviously awful at talking about it.
And the way he does it, he kind of just flies into it and starts talking all about the nature around him.
He's like, oh, so did you see the geese on the pond today? And the bees in the bushes and all these... And then Hugh Grant's character starts talking about catfish or something.
Yeah, I mean, this film isn't big on light relief, but this is one of the things that I think we can enjoy from it. And the fact is Hugh Grant, and a young Hugh Grant who's in a very interesting part of his career, it made it all the more interesting. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it's good to see the other side to Stevens' character.
But don't you think if you were just going to remove Hugh Grant's character as like a single character study as well, like very interesting to see him go from this kind of innocent young man who is freshly engaged, kind of going along with whatever his godfather wants. Father recently died. And the evolution that even he goes on as a character later on, he essentially becomes like a spy.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a later flashpoint with Stevens' character and his refusal to acknowledge the questionable nature of his master's political activities. And I think we should talk about that scene a little bit further down the line because it's a bit more relevant later on. But another interesting scene I think that builds up to that is when they're, I think, at another post-dinner conference where these men and associates of the Earl of Darlington are sat in the drawing room, probably drinking brandy, and they're talking to Stevens and they're almost all looking at him, asking quite in-depth political questions about the current global trade climate.
But that's all but they're mocking him. Essentially, they're trying to prove a point, and they're saying like the lower classes can't speak for themselves. They don't have essentially like they're not intelligent enough to be able to make decisions about the country. So why should they have the vote? And that they shouldn't have a say in politics and governance because clearly they don't have any clue. And they're just using Stevens. They're just using him to mock him.
They're making an exhibition of him, and they're not thinking about him as a person. It's an exhibition in the sense of the working class have and shouldn't have a voice because they don't have any kind of thought activity behind.
But there's also no kind of compassion for the fact that Stevens is on the job and he's kind of doomed if he does, doomed if he doesn't, because if he agrees with them, he'd be kind of, implicating himself in everything they're saying, which is very fascist. Or if he disagrees, then he could potentially lose his job. So there's a real kind of lack of, there's like a removal of the upper class mentality, in that they don't understand what it feels like to have a job.
Yeah. Yeah, and as the relationship develops between Stevens and Miss Kenton, I thought it was becoming more obvious that there was an attraction from Miss Kenton to Stevens. But when I asked you halfway through, I think you hadn't recognised it.
It's not that I didn't recognise it. I think it's just not... It's not a romantic, passionate relationship. And I know there's one scene that would kind of counter that, which is the book scene. But I don't see it as a passionate relationship. I see it as that she is... It ties into that line where she says she's a coward and she's scared of leaving and she feels lonely. And I think she has spent clearly some time in the house by that point. And I think she is just... I don't know what would attract her to him. He has no kind of... There's nothing redeeming about his personality because he's like a robot.
I think he just has to do anything that's not a robot. He just has to show some inkling of humanism and sense of humour, and that would be it. That would be all she needs.
Yeah, and she's like constantly craving that. She's almost like begging him, willing him to do it. And we're all waiting for him to have this emotional break, like this moment where we see that he's going to be human. And we're always willing for it. Even the bit where, I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but where he gets a bottle of wine from the cellar and it smashes on the floor and he goes like, he kind of curses it, but then he grabs another one and continues. And you think like, all of the stuff that's been building up to that bottle smashing, you'd think would like send any man over the edge. And it doesn't. And it feels like the whole film is us waiting, almost urging, pleading, waiting, begging for this moment to come where he's going to have an emotional break, a kind of a cathartic release of everything he's been holding in, and that never comes.
No, I mean, the scene that, for me, I think is the high point of the film, that I thought was absolutely outstanding in the way it was directed, was the scene where Stevens is reading a book in his own private time, as he quotes, and Miss Kenton has come into the room and is almost playing with him and toying with him and asking him what he's reading, almost preempting what and saying and asking him, is it a romance novel or is it something smutty or is it educational or whatever? And I think me and you at the time were fearing the worst, in that, is he showing a devotion to his master and reading something really shocking like Mein Kampf or something?
Yeah. That's definitely what he's reading.
And reading like something to educate himself on Germany or something and the current Nazi regime. And I don't know, it's a first time watch for us, and I don't know whether that's an obvious thing to expect for the average viewer, but we were certainly thinking that. But the way that the camera focuses in on the two, and the way that Stephen steadfastly just doesn't move and doesn't change expression and just grips the book tighter and tighter, while Emma Thompson just cannot draw herself away.
But
I think that was absolutely terrific.
Her response to that is our response of, why would you be so defensive about you reading like the most boring... I'm not saying romance is boring because that's not what I'm saying. But he's reading a kind of trivial romance book.
Because to him, I think it's a sign of weakness. I think that's what it is. It's a real slight on his own ego, as a reflection, as a man and as head of the house.
But is
downstairs.
that also a sign of what he craves deep down? Not sure, because he never...
Yeah.
He never engages in that kind of conversation. But is that what is his escape? Is that what he deep down craves, is romance and companionship and affection in that way?
But that scene, I think, was absolutely amazing. Like, I think the use of climactic, slowly building music and the way the camera slowly hones in on them, I think it was a real high point of the movie.
For the first kind of like half, 2/3 of the film, we haven't really flashed back to the 1950s much. And then suddenly we get quite a lot. It becomes very rapid. The switches backwards and forwards to 1930s, 1958, as Stevens is driving into Somerset to meet with Kenton. Both of them obviously older. Kenton having got married, separated, had a child, who is now having a child 20 years later since they'd last kind of seen each other. So that's kind of what we're building towards. And I was struck by how Ishiguro, this whole part of the film, felt. If you've ever seen Never Let Me Go, you would understand, or if you've ever read any Ishiguro, that he is fascinated with the English countryside and English kind of seaside. He sets Never Let Me Go all through like the Norfolk countryside and then the Norfolk coast. It's incredibly bleak and it's incredibly depressing, but there's also this kind of whole underlying theme of nature and humanism as well, and I've really felt that in those scenes in Remains of the Day when he's driving like through the countryside, and there's a kind of that release of Stevens from the house. There's opportunity for him to kind of express and become his own person, and yet we're kind of waiting for that to happen the entire time, and it never really seems to transpire.
There is a certain hint of catharsis, isn't there, when he's kind of driving around the countryside in the Daimler, and those odd scenes where he meets the gents down the pub, and he's kind of reflecting on his employment.
And I think hearing their very anti-fascist views and kind of shock when they kind of figure out who he is, he should have the human reaction would be to condemn what happened. And he's still so neutral and weirdly kind of nonchalant about the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it hints to a lot of...
He's like a robot.
It hints to a certain degree of shame, but he's in no way expressing any kind of regret. It's such a nuanced, it's like kind of conflicted character, this. It's absolutely fascinating to study.
But I was waiting, if anyone listening has ever seen Never Let Me Go, Andrew Garfield plays a character called Tommy, and Tommy, the whole build-up of this film, the reason I've never shown you Never Let Me Go is because I've always worried that it's not overtly sci-fi or dystopian in any way, but there is this underlying theme which Kazuo Ishiguro just adores. We've seen it in Clara and the Sun as well. But it follows a very similar theme of this kind of build-up with Tommy's character, and then there is this release. It's in the middle of this like field in the Norfolk countryside, and Tommy just screams. And the scene in the book is so brilliant, but also in the film it's just perfectly performed by Andrew Garfield, and I was kind of waiting for that moment, and I think because I knew of that, I was waiting for this moment from Stevens, and it never comes, because you're waiting for this, we're in nature, we would expect this return to nature, maybe he's gonna be inspired to release everything, because it feels very kind of freeing and like taking this gulp of fresh air. And it never comes. It's a really kind of frustrating part of the film.
There's no big finish in this. I mean, we don't want to spoil too much about the final scenes, but I found it very realistic in terms of two people meeting later in life, having spent so long time away, and they being kind of this very kind of amicable reconciling almost, because the end of their relationship in the 30s and their professional association was difficult because Miss Kenton did become very confrontational to him by the end, and it made Stevens very uncomfortable. And those scenes were fascinating to study from on an acting level and a character level. But it was fascinating to watch their meeting together again and then going to
we had to go back, didn't we? Because there's that brilliant shot on the pier in Western-super-Mare where they shot the coastal scenes, and it's the only part of the film, I think, where you actually see what Stevens is thinking / feeling.
Yeah, because he's talking in a much more kind of human way. He doesn't sound like a robot for a start. He's talking about a lot of sad events that unfolded. He's saying that Lord Darlington essentially died from a broken heart after he sued the Daily Express for libel, and he lost that, and his own reputation suffered as a result, and he became very sad and deteriorated into obscurity. The Cardinal, that the Hugh Grant character, the godson, was killed in the war, which is very sad to hear after the role he's had to play earlier in the film.
Perhaps that's why the Earl felt so incredibly guilty, because Hugh Grant's character was meant to be like his son.
Yeah.
But that shot you have of Emma Thompson in the background, completely unaware of what is going on and what we can see, of Anthony Hopkins staring kind of just left of shot, almost like over our left shoulder, but we can see into his eyes that are just filled with tears.
Yeah.
And I just think it's...
That was powerful. And that builds into the scene where they bid farewell at the bus, when the bus comes.
We had to go back because we couldn't understand what had kind of prompted that. And I think that's almost more powerful because it was deeply just a build-up, I think, of the conversation of her talking about her child and the love she had for her child in wanting to stay near to her. And
Yeah, do you think that's like a realisation on Stevens' part, that their lives have become very different and they've just forged such different paths, and that Stevens has he's reduced all his options really because he's remained so steadfast in his job. He hasn't left the house that he works in. He's remained loyal. He's not wanted to form any relationships.
I think it's that Emma Thompson's character, Kenton, she says, I love my daughter. My husband, who she's kind of estranged from at this point, needs her more than anybody does in the whole world. She wants to stay close to her daughter, and yet she still wonders. She admits that she wonders if she's messed up her entire life by ending up where she is, because she's clearly deeply unhappy with her marriage and her situation. Yet she obviously loves her daughter and wants to stay close to her.
Yeah.
But she admits that she feels like she's made many mistakes and that she has messed up her life. And I think that is what prompts the tears maybe in Stevens, because he has a moment of recognition that he too has made mistakes. And if he could change things, would he?
Yeah, I mean, Miss Kenton, played by Emma Thompson, is far more easily self-critical of herself than Anthony Hopkins' character. There's a far more steadfast and strong ego about him, obviously, as we see in the earlier part of the film. I don't want to talk too much about the final scenes because it's kind of like a subtle wind down. I found that the last few scenes, there's nothing big and dramatic that happens. It's just very interesting to see how it plays out.
It doesn't go where you think it's going to go.
No.
I think is the kind of
crux
of it.
All I would say is I find that final shot absolutely stunning. I find that wonderful when it's almost like a helicopter bird's eye shot as it pulls away from the house.
But it's almost an exact... I mean, it's higher up, but it's almost an exact reverse shot of the opening shot of the film, which is a zoom into the house.
And it's really doing tribute to the British countryside. I don't think it's ever looked so stunning on film.
Yeah, and that big stately house.
Well, let's talk about some of the trivia behind the film, because it's a fascinating production to look into, being our first Merchant Ivory film. So the early production and planning of Remains of the Day actually was very different to what we finally saw. Columbia Pictures, who'd bought the rights, had planned for Mike Nichols to direct, with a script written by the famous playwright Harold Pinter, on a budget that amounted to $26 million. When Mike Nichols was on board as a director, Meryl Streep was the first choice to play Miss Kenton.
I can't imagine Meryl Streep in that role. I love Meryl Streep, but I don't think I can see her in this role in the same way that Emma Thompson.
It would have been very different. It would have had a very different feel. I mean, Meryl Streep is as versatile as any actress, but it would have felt very different, there's no doubt. But anyway, she apparently read for the part, and she lost it to Emma Thompson, and it caused quite a fallout. Meryl Streep even fired her long-term agent at the time. And Jeremy Irons was another who'd read for the part of Stevens, but obviously missed out to a fellow acting heavyweight.
It's funny because after what's it called? the series you watched last year? Brideshead Revisited. Oh, your mum is going to be so proud of me for mentioning Brideshead Revisited on this podcast. But because of Brideshead, I don't think of Jeremy Irons as like a lower class actor. I think of him as like an upper class actor.
And dare I say it, Jeremy Irons would have been a good shout for the Earl.
Yeah, James Fox's character, for sure. Definitely. I can see that.
But I don't think he should have got it.
But he was almost too big for it.
Yeah, I think James Fox was perfect for this.
Yeah, I would agree.
So eventually, James Ivory and Ismail Merchant came on board to the production via the studio and developed the film. I think that's why they came on board. Developed the film independently for a far lesser cost at $11 million. Apparently, some of Pinter's work remains on the script, but he actually asked to remove his name from the credits. Filming took place at Durham Park in Gloucestershire, Powderham Castle in Devon, and in Weston-super-Mare, as we mentioned. Mm-hmm. And as we kind of mentioned a few times off before we recorded, the character of Sir Geoffrey Wren, now this guy was one of the gents who walks in later in a dinner suit, followed by loads of men in black shirts, is obviously based on Oswald Mosley. So it's obviously loosely based on these real true life characters, and historically it's incredibly accurate. But they're not wanting to obviously name drop any real life people.
There's also a prime minister that comes in. Is that in the same scene or a later scene?
Yeah, that's Chamberlain.
I think that's a later scene, actually.
That's Chamberlain.
Slightly.
Who was prime minister when Britain eventually went to war in 1939. That's him.
But yeah, there was definitely... You could see how they had been inspired with that Geoffrey Wren character by Oswald Mosley, and like the moustache and the kind of characterization and everything.
Yeah, physically definitely looks like him as well.
Definitely.
So it did very well at the awards, understandably. At the BAFTAs, The Remains of the Day was nominated at a number of categories, including Best Film, Best Direction, Best Actor in a Leading Role for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Emma Thompson, and also Best Adapted Screenplay and Cinematography. The only winner from these was Hopkins, who won for Best Actor. At the Oscars, it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Original Score. Unfortunately, it didn't win any of these categories.
At the Oscars?
Yeah.
That's such a shame.
The other Best Picture nominees that year that it was up against were Daniel Day-Lewis's In the Name of the Father, also with Emma Thompson, The Piano, The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, and the ultimate winner was Schindler's List.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very competitive year. Apparently, though...
Big year for kind of those, like, Holocaust war epics.
Yeah, I mean, The Fugitive is a contemporary thriller. The Piano is a period romance. In the Name of the Father is a movie about the IRA revolutionary, and it becomes a legal film. But yeah, I can see what you mean. But I found this interesting also, that the film is listed, even today, at number 64 in the BFI's official top 100 British films list.
It is considered one of the best kind of British
I can really see why, yeah.
war films of all time.
So let's talk about the cast, because there's a lot to talk about here. Anthony Hopkins as Stevens. It's the second appearance for him, we must mention first of all, on the podcast after playing, what's his face?
Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal, thank you. On Silence of the Lambs. Yeah.
You have to do the...
Whatever we say about the two performances, it's far more difficult to nab quotes from this film as it is The Silence of the Lambs. But
not as many sound bites.
Yeah. I mean, he was unbelievable in that film. But for me, this was just one of the all-time performances, I would say. And well, I think in my book, we've already got a leading frontrunner in best acting performance. Well, for when we do the Oscars at the end of the year. Easily the best acting performance I think we've seen.
I think the funny thing is that you've obviously... I know I'm kind of calling back to Sinners from last week, but like you saw Sinners last year, so you might not consider Sinners a this year film. But for me, it's a this year film.
Yeah, but there's no one who can compete in terms of acting, in terms of like nuanced character perfection.
I'm just thinking of that scene on the pier. That one shot is so powerful.
I don't think I can name any actors who can evoke so many different emotions in one facial reaction. There's so many different things going on in his face and his eyes at one moment. It's a really remarkable
Because he's
talent.
like dead in the face, but his eyes are full of tears.
There's so much going on behind those eyes in every shot. And so few actors can actually perform that. It's so difficult to do. And he's an actor just made for the screen. He really is. That's why he's top of the game.
And yet there's nothing kind of...
Theatrical. Nothing overly dramatic.
Yeah, there's nothing overly dramatic
like
about him. And there's nothing completely, like made for screen about his face. But there's something so cinematic about his...
Completely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of performance. And even as an older actor in modern films like The Father, I think we're still getting that now.
I think he's probably got better as he's got older.
Probably. Yeah, I think you'd have to really kind of study his films. I mean, he's in films like The Elephant Man, he is a main character, but he's kind of joint with other actors, and there's not as much chance for him to shine like there is in this. But I think by the 90s, the best British films are really shining a light on period films like this, where it really gave them a platform to do this. Wonderful performance. And it really is his film.
Oh, excited to talk about this next one.
Emma Thompson as Sally. And again, it's our first Emma Thompson
First for the
performance.
pod. This is huge.
Yeah. Really, really good. And probably one of my favourite things I've seen her in, to be honest, because,
You haven't seen Sense and Sensibility.
Well, it's that period, isn't it? It's this build-up. She emerged in the 80s in television, in all these shows like Tutti Frutti, Robbie Coltrane. And then she formed this professional and personal relationship with Kenneth Branagh. So everything she was in, bar this, probably at this period, was with him. In all the things he directed, like Henry V, Peter's Friends, Much Ado, Fortunes of War, the great TV show. She was very much professionally tied to him. And this is one of the few things where she could, and actually also In the Name of the Father. So she was probably nominated for 2 films in the same year.
Right.
And I think the year before, she was also nominated for Howard's End. So there we have 2 Merchant Ivory films starring Emma Thompson, where she has a shining light that really took her onto the next level in her career.
Yeah.
But then, years later, I think her career kind of moves into a different direction, doesn't it? When we get films her in the next phase of her life, and Love Actually. Things we're likely to repeat again on the podcast, I'm sure.
But you're skipping over some of the best things about Emma Thompson, which is her writing. And she wrote the screenplay for Sense and Sensibility, which was one of the best loved adaptations of a Jane Austen ever, with Hugh Grant and Alan Rickman and Kate Winslet. It doesn't get better.
But is that Merchant Ivory? I don't know.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think it
No,
is.
that's he's the Japanese Korean
Ang Lee.
Ang Lee's direction.
Is that him? Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's very close for me with the Pride and Prejudice adaptation I showed you last year.
Matthew McFadden.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
probably writing is better. It's just I love the performances in Pride and Prejudice, but Emma Thompson is just great in everything she does. Even in Harry Potter as Trelawney, she's great, and she's in 1 film or 2 films.
So where would this rank then with our all-time performances that we've seen with Emma Thompson?
I mean, nothing beats the Joni Mitchell scene in Love Actually for me, but...
Yeah, but in terms of an all-time leading performance, I would say this is got
leading performance, well, that's different, and you haven't seen Sense and Sensibility, but this competes for me.
Yeah, so it's up there with that. I mean, she's very good in Howard's End as well, but I think this was better all
She was
round.
also brilliant in Nanny McPhee.
And then much later in her career, she's still working, a lot, isn't she?
Oh.
She was in that film that looked
You're
very
joking.
racy, like Good Luck to You, Leo Grand.
I know. She's always got something out.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's done a lot of work in TV in recent years as well, but I think we'll definitely be talking about her again in future.
Oh, definitely.
Next on the cast list is James Fox as Lord Darlington.
Such an interesting performance from him, because I was saying to you halfway through, I don't think I've ever seen so much of him in 1 film, because he's usually a supporting actor, but usually in 1 scene.
Yeah. Well, It's definitely the first appearance we're going to get of the Fox acting dynasty for a couple in Devonty, that's for sure.
First / maybe only.
Well, no, far from
Oh,
it.
I didn't know you had a Lawrence Fox film lined up.
Well, we've certainly got an Edward Fox film lined up, and we've certainly got more James Fox films lined up. Or TV appearances and things like Poirot. Absolutely. But I think with James Fox, you definitely have to mark his career in like two halves, because he was in a lot of great films in the 60s, like the kitchen sink films like Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner and The Servant, which I think you're going to really love, because that is a Basil Dearden film with Dirk Bogarde, and it's very controversial.
But we've seen Amelia Fox in something recently.
And then a big film he did in the early 70s was the really like fascinating, which I had yet to see, the Nicholas Roeg psychedelic film with Mick Jagger performance that I think some people apparently walked out of the cinema because it was so controversial. But then he went a bit crazy and he went on a 10-year hiatus from acting to go and find himself, apparently. He went apparently to America to become an evangelical Christian. So he didn't act at all in the sort of second half to the early 80s. Then he got back involved with British TV, and he's in some of those Play for Today ones that the BBC did. Then I think the first film he did on his return to his career was David Lean's last film, which was A Passage to India, which is on the list. We'll see him again when we recover Sexy Beast for the podcast.
Recover?
Yeah. Because he
Is that on your list to show me again?
Yeah, Sexy Beast is amazing.
I think that was one
Brilliant.
of the first films you must have shown me.
Yeah. He plays the kind of tough gangster in the dressing gown that Ian McShane has to report to once Ben Kingsley reports to him. It's brilliant. And James Fox is that tough in the dressing gown.
I don't remember him in it.
You probably wouldn't, because he's only in like 3 scenes. But he's in that. And yeah, he's in Death on the Nile with Suchet as Poirot, which is up there. You know, it's definitely up there with the best Poirot episodes. Christopher Reeve as Congressman, the American Lewis. It's the first time we're covering this man on the show as well. Have you seen any Christopher Reeve films?
I don't think so.
No. We will be doing Superman. We have to, because I'm not a big superhero fan, but those films are iconic, you know, of that era. The ultimate emergence of the blockbuster. But yeah, I mean, we know that his life story was ultimately very sad, but very inspiring at the time. But he really came through a period in sort of American theatre in the 70s and was really highly thought of. Went into a lot of television films before he got the Superman gig. And then was in a lot of interesting films. But yeah, his life obviously changed not long after this. I think it was only 2 years after this movie. His life-changing accident tragically happened. And then he obviously went on to become the most inspiring disability activist out there. Fascinating documentary there is that I think people have to watch is the Christopher Reeve story, which I think won a lot of awards last year, I believe. And it just goes into the incredible amount of historical insight, interviews with people who knew him at the time, and he was good friends with Robin Williams as well. So very sad story, but good performance in this.
Yeah.
I would have liked a bit more depth in terms of the character. I would say that.
Yeah, I don't know. He kind of serves as this like American voice, and then I don't know. It's a bit of an odd character, really, but good performance.
Peter Vaughan.
Oh, he's really good in this. Really good in this.
Yeah.
Very similar to Our Friends in the North in a weird way.
Well, yeah, but find me something he's not good in, I think, because he was talking about actors who were always supporting actors. He's one. Absolutely. But I think you were very impressed by how good he was, and gritty and authentic in Our Friends in the North.
Oh, yeah. So good.
Yeah, he really stood for everything what was good about that show. What a brilliant TV show that was in the 90s. But yeah, a very familiar British actor who did so much work from the 70s onwards. For everything from Porridge to Our Friends in the North. But one of the things I think we might cover first for the podcast is one of the best original ghost stories for Christmas in the early 70s, which I think we may well cover, and he is the lead in that, to be fair. But he's in a lot of British comedies in the 60s when he was getting started, in thrillers and horrors. In terms of big movies, I would say Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman is on the list, and he was in French Lieutenant's Woman as well with Meryl Streep. So those are the movies I think they're most likely to cover again with Peter Vaughan. Hugh Grant, another first-time appearance for the podcast.
That is outrageous because I think he's probably like my third most watched actor on Letterboxd.
Yeah, it's amazing we haven't covered him yet. We'll definitely be doing a lot more of him.
That's because we've not really touched the surface with Richard Curtis. I mean, we've done About Time, but that's one of the few Richard Curtis films he's not in.
Yeah, we've not done Love Actually yet for Christmas, but I think it's only a matter of time. Again, another actor you can kind of pinpoint and say there's 2 or 3 periods to his career. And this, I think, is him coming out of that early part of his career when he's starting to get more meatier roles before he really blew up. The following year with 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which is obviously on the list. My favourite Hugh Grant performance and favourite Richard Curtis film. But early ones like Maurice may well cover. That's another Merchant Ivory film. White Mischief is really good. I watched that last year for the first time, and that's much more entertaining. There's definitely, because there's a big element of murder around that one as well. He's got a small role in that, but that's, I think, 87 or 88. And then once he'd really hit the big time, movies like Notting Hill, Mickey Blue Eyes, Bridget Jones, Love Actually.
Jones is
I'm
so
sure
good.
they're all big candidates for you to choose at some point.
Oh, I mean, Bridget Jones, Love Actually, 100%. 4 Weddings. I'm not a massive Notting Hill fan, but
It's entertaining though, isn't it?
it could be down the line. I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, and he's entering a new, interesting period of his career where he's getting much more darker roles, where there's a lot of more of an evil side to him. And
We've seen Paddington, that's evil.
Yep.
That's dark.
Tim Pigott-Smith as Mr. Tom Ben, worth mentioning him as well, who is the love interest,
Oh, he's Emma Thompson's
the material
husband.
love interest, yeah, and who we see her romancing at one point, and then becomes the husband, and then they become estranged as well, don't they? But he's in everything. Like, he was a British supporting actor who appeared in loads of stuff from the 80s onwards, from big shows on British TV like Jewel in the Crown. One of the another top tier Poirot episode called Taken at the Flood, we have to cover. He was also in The Hour, apparently, which we've also seen. Other big films like Escape to Victory, Gangs of New York, Johnny English, V for Vendetta, and Quantum of Solace. He appeared in one of those.
I do not remember him in V for Vendetta.
I don't remember him at all in Gangs of New York. I don't remember that at all. Michael Lonsdale is the other one I pointed out, with the obvious Bond connection as Dupont, whose feet are playing him up. French actor who appeared in loads of French, British and Hollywood films from the 60s onwards, all the way back from the early 60s. He's in a great 60s war movie, French one, which I only watched last year, called Is Paris Burning, which has got a very interesting appearance from Orson Welles. But he was also in Dare the Jackal with Edward Fox in the early 70s. He played Hugo Drax in arguably the worst Bond film of all time.
That's subjective.
In Moonraker. And there's a much older actor I saw also that he's in Spielberg's Munich as well. Which is
Munich's on my list.
Good, because that's an underrated film, and I've only watched that once a long time ago.
I've never seen it.
Need to mention the director, who's James Ivory, part of the Merchant Ivory production duo. An American director who obviously was also a screenwriter and joint producer with his partner. But yeah, they formed a partnership together in the early to mid-60s, initially in India, doing a lot of British films and English language movies. And by the 80s, of course, they built a considerable reputation in Britain and Hollywood, doing loads of these screen adaptations of classic novels by the likes of E.M. Forster, with the ones we've mentioned, like A Room with a View, Maurice and Howard's End. So I'm sure there's more likely that there's a good chance of more of these to come from yourself. Yes.
I mean, I've seen A Room with a View separately. I think that's one that's worth you seeing, whether I show it to you or you watch it separately anyway.
Absolutely. So what was your final rating of this out of 5?
Okay. Well, I think it's a brilliant portrait of kind of that 1930s British history, but also that kind of entrenched classism and institutionalism, and that kind of indoctrination of the lower classes. that scene where Anthony Hopkins' character is kind of saying, like, I don't have a thought, like, my master must be right, I will believe him implicitly, just kind of exposes that whole issue of how the working class were kind of entrenched in the whole system as well. There was no kind of breaking out of it. And I think what Hopkins offers is such an interesting character. That constant kind of teetering on the edge of, will he break out of this or won't he? And that kind of question that hangs over us for the whole film. And I love Ishiguro's kind of fascination with British countryside and humanism, and I love all of the themes that he covers. And it's not like Never Let Me Go in many ways, but it's also so recognisable in many of its scenes and its settings that it feels very like his writing. And I just think that the set is beautiful, and just the whole kind of costume design of it all is stunning, especially because it's kind of teetering between 1930s and essentially early 1960s, late 1950s. So I love that kind of balance between the two periods. But it's not as dramatic as I thought it was going to be in many ways, and I guess that's kind of the point, but for that reason I gave it a 4.
It's funny because sometimes we watch period films and you wanted more drama from them. But I actually went through this and was almost basking and loving how subtle this one was. And so I think me and you had slight differing kind of reactions to that. And sometimes the lack of drama kind of frustrates me a little bit in British costume period films. But this is one where I thought the characterization was so intense that, just
You
loving
forgave
every
it,
moment.
yeah.
I definitely forgave it. I thought it was outstanding, and I thought it was easily probably your best choice this year. We've done, we're only in the first week of March. But I think you've got a lot to live up to if you can try and better this in terms of pure acting and in terms of great British films. Wonderful production, absolutely wonderful. Amazing casting choices throughout, and such nuance and understated acting. Some really memorable scenes between Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins. A fascinating political climate and time period it spans between pre and post World War II. Terribly moving how it goes from their relationship in the mid-30s to, and then refocuses years later on how life has affected them 25 years later, and how they've both changed and their reflections on life. I love that, and I think it was really, really quite moving. But I think it's hard to only accept you're going to watch this film once. I think I definitely need to rewatch this. And I think this is easily one of my all-time favourite performances by Hopkins. Absolutely. An actor who's done so many different type of performances, but I would challenge anyone to name a better performance than this. So I've given it 4.25. Overall, I enjoyed it more than Barry Lyndon, because I find
that's such a big claim.
I find Barry Lyndon more technically stunning, I would probably argue, in terms of its shots and camera work. Part of it did feel a bit drawn out to me, and I wasn't as invested in the characters as
But you
others.
also made a comparison between this and Phantom Thread, and
Yeah,
I would
Phantom
disagree.
Thread.
I think Phantom Thread is a better film all round.
I think Phantom Thread has the drama over this, absolutely. But there's terrible elements of obsessiveness and repression that you can paint the parallels between. That kind of robotic steadfastness in these British male characters of a certain era. Amazing performances. I mean, to compare Daniel Day-Lewis between Anthony Hopkins and this is very difficult. But I was really impressed by this one. Anyway, well, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with my next selection.
Mr. Stevens, don't you wait. That bus is always late. Come in out of the wet.
You must take good care of yourself, Mrs. Benn.
You too, Mr. Stevens. Promise me that.
Oh, yes, I promise. You must try to do all you can to make these years happy ones for yourself and for your husband. We may never meet again, Mrs. Benn. That is why I'm permitting myself to be so personal, if you will forgive me.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Oh, here it comes. It's on time for once.
so very much for coming. It was so very kind of you. It was so nice to see you again.
It was a pleasure to see you again, Mrs. Benn. Goodbye. Take care.
Right, it's for my next selection. That was a very good choice. I'm very impressed. Well, it's been a while since we've done a TV episode or anything.
Oh, God. What are you showing me?
So what do you think I may be selecting?
Are you going back to Fool's War?
I'm not. I will be doing something new for us and for Couple Indemnity.
Okay.
Something I've not introduced you to yet, ever.
Is it another murder mystery?
Yes and no. I think this is probably one of the TV things that focuses less on the murder mystery element and more on the period and the adaptation from the classic stories.
It's a Sherlock Holmes.
We are doing Sherlock Holmes.
It's a Sherlock Holmes.
Of the 80s, of the great
I mean,
Jeremy
I
Brett.
just finished teaching Sherlock Holmes, so I might be pretty critical.
Yeah, but it's the ITV series from the early to mid 80s, and that were made by Granada, who were a subsidiary of ITV, who did some great dramas from the 70s into the 80s, and into the 90s as well. And the Sherlock Holmes series went on from the early to mid 80s till probably the early to mid 90s. So about 10 years of solid adaptations. And Jeremy Brett is the most loyal actor to the original Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes.
How many Sherlock Holmes have you seen?
Probably about 6 at least. And he's always the most rated that there ever was. You will get some contrasting opinion, but Jeremy Brett was known to be the most method and was quite extraordinary in how much he was passionate about the character. But there's some great supporting performances throughout. So the first episode we're going to do, because I want to do another one later in the year, the one we're going to do is the second episode they ever made for it, and it's called The Dancing Men, and it was released in 1984. So it's only an hour long, so it will be easy to watch, and it'll make for some interesting discussion. So looking forward to that. It's been a while since I've been wanting to do this for a while, for us to do a Sherlock Holmes by Jeremy Brett. So that'll be all for this week. We've been Couple Indemnity, and I'll let Iz sign off for this week.
I knew that you were going to do this to me. We've been Couple Indemnity. You can find us on all good podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, to name a few. We would love for you to follow and subscribe to us, rate us, leave us any feedback if you wish. That would be very appreciated. And you can get in touch with us to let us know your thoughts about this film at coupleindemnity@gmail.com or by contacting us via social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter /X.
And YouTube.
And YouTube. We're also on YouTube. And are we on Blue Sky?
We are on Blue Sky.
Apparently we're on Blue Sky as well, so you can contact us there as well.
And Izzy's got some fancy new designs on the Instagram.
Oh yeah, that's been fun. I'm enjoying that. But
Izzy's our social media designer for the podcast.
Me and Canva, we're like this. So that's all for this week. This has been Couple Indemnity, and we will be back next week for Sherlock Holmes.
And The Dancing Men. See you next week, folks.
Bye, guys.